This is the Hypnotorious Podcast. I am David Barron. Also with me here is John Wylie. John,
Hi, everybody.
how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Well,
These are always fun.
I know they're a blast. Last week I got to sort of talk about some writing I had done with my book on how to build a cult, and I promised we had promised that you'd get to talk about your book on hypnosis. And just to preface this for everyone who is listening, the whole purpose of the Hypnotorious Podcast is John and I were professional hypnotists. We've been doing it in combination up to 30 years of combined working with people. And we want to just inform people about hypnosis. We're making it as deep, as broad, as wide, and as tall as we can get as far as the topic of hypnosis, so that it appeals to those people who are just mildly curious but want to know more, and going as specifically to those people who are actual professionals who want to learn more, sharpen their skills, and find out new information.
Absolutely, because everybody should know about hypnosis, David.
Well, as everyone says, when I tell people I'm a hypnotist, what often happens is people will say, the mind is such an incredible thing, we don't know how to use it. And that's absolutely true. We're in awe of it, but it's like be given a great supercomputer with no instruction manual.
Right.
And and in fact, since I talked about my book last week, John, I really want to give this over to you. You recently created a book called The Ultimate Guide to Hypnosis, and there were you've been doing this a while. There are obviously some reasons behind it. For you writing it, when I've written, I've decided I don't write anything until I really feel called to write it. So what brought you to decide to write The Ultimate Guide to Hypnosis?
Well, that's definitely true for me. I definitely felt called to write this book. I thought that there was a legitimate need for it for several reasons. The first of which is what we were discussing earlier. We have this amazingly powerful supercomputer between our ears, and people have such a hard time knowing how to use it, specifically to make changes in their life, to help get rid of problems that they're experiencing, overcoming bad habits, as well as getting more of the good stuff that they want in their life, whatever that happens to be. And so what made me decide to write The Ultimate Guide to Hypnosis is I wanted to create a resource for lay people who, just average Joe and average Jane, who maybe didn't really understand much about hypnosis other than what they saw on TV and movies, and maybe went to Las Vegas that one time and saw with that stage show. And I wanted really passionately for people to understand, hey guys, there's much more to hypnosis than meets the eye, and it can really be transformative for you. So I decided to write a book specifically for clients, for potential clients, so that they could really understand what hypnosis was about, so that they could make those changes.
Okay.
That's what that's about.
Excellent. Now, I'm going to ask you about, first of all, I'm going to ask you the purpose of the book, but I want to remember to ask you about the process of you writing the book too.
Sure.
So the purpose, the goal of the book, on its surface and based on what you just said, was to just inform people. But what other objectives did you have in writing it?
Well, to all those people out there who are in the process of learning hypnosis, or who, like David and I, actually have a practice or in the beginning stages of that, from the perspective of a hypnotherapist, I wanted a tool to educate my clients and my potential clients. So from that perspective, it is in many respects it's an expanded pre-talk. It's all those things that you would want your potential client or your client before they ever do their first induction to understand and to internalize. This book is designed to help anyone and everyone to understand that hypnosis is natural. That's a very it's a very common theme in this book, is that hypnosis is a natural part of human existence. Hypnosis has existed, whether we called it hypnosis or not, from the very first earliest days that human beings existed. Whatever you believe that to be.
Right, and that's as opposed to being a supernatural force that someone with magical skills imposes on somebody. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's a natural part of human beings. It's not about some magical person with, like you said, supernatural powers imposing their will and controlling some other person's mind. So it's, in many regards, it's an expanded pre-talk. And of course, it gives you the opportunity to go in greater depth and to discuss at length all those things that you can imagine a client might ask, to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to feel confident, and even, as they by the time they finish reading these books, the book, they should feel excited, and that's exactly what I wanted to create.
Good. Now I have a question that I'm asking you, not as hypnotist, but as hypnotist to hypnotist, but as writer to writer. I have a personal process that I sort of go through when I'm writing a book. I have a big idea, which is like, have a finished book, and and then I start an outline and just start adding more and more content to the outline, and eventually, as I do it, usually the outline becomes the entire book. So I'm curious, what is the process that you went through to get all of this information out down into detail as a writer? Yeah,
good question. So basically, my approach was I did my very best, David, to back up and put myself back in the position of a novice, someone who really didn't know much about hypnosis, and I came up with all the questions that I would like to have answered if I were in that situation. So that's the approach that I took. I would basically write out questions that I would want answered, and then I stepped back into the shoes of a hypnotherapist and I answered those questions. And then it was simply a process of making sure that it was coherent and organized, and that, because sometimes that's kind of hard to do when you're trying to put yourself in the position of someone who's a learner. It's sometimes difficult to step out of that state of mind of being more experienced. So that took a little work, but it's not perfect by any means, and there are already things that I've thought of that I would like to add and modify a little bit, but that was my approach basically in a nutshell.
Yeah, I noticed you say something that reminds me, doing this particular job, this career, this skill set of hypnosis for so long, after a while you think of it as second nature, and I forget that that I used to struggle at it, and I have to remember, okay, I have to not assume people already know these sorts of things. I have to make myself an ignorant person again, and realize that I have to instruct in detail, make sure they understand the underlying details, and talk about it. And that's a very humbling experience. The good part, I've been told that my books are well written and understandable, which is a nice compliment. But I also had to realize that it was rather difficult to do that because I've been doing it for so long, and it
Right.
is humbling to get to that point.
Yeah. It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, what do you think? And again, you're going to be revealing parts of the book in this by answering this question, which is great.
Okay.
As a hypnotherapist, what are the important things that people need to understand about hypnosis, first of all?
Well, just like the pre-talk, some of the fundamental foundational ideas that a person needs to understand is a basic understanding of how their mind works from the perspective of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Okay, because there are multiple ways to approach that, and yes, they interrelate and can contribute to each other. But we're not talking about how the mind works from the perspective of a neuroscientist or a doctor, right? We're talking about the perspective of how the mind works from the perspective of a hypnotherapist and from a person who wants to take full advantage of their mind to help make those changes that they want to make. So one of the earliest sections in the book talks about the different parts, the different components of the mind, specifically the conscious mind, the critical factor, the subconscious mind, and also the unconscious mind. And I understand there are different schools of thought in regards to exactly what those parts are and their distinction, but that's how I break it down into those four parts.
Okay, keep in mind that we have a broad listenership here, so go ahead and give your simplified descriptions of those things. Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, let's start with the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is that part of us that medically trained people will often refer to as the autonomic nervous system. It's the part that's in charge of keeping us safe through things like reflexes. When you go to the doctor and he wants to make sure you're healthy, so he taps that little spot just below your kneecap and your leg jumps up. Okay, that's testing your reflexes. That's a function of the unconscious mind in this context, or as medical people would say, the autonomic nervous system. And another thing that's controlled by the unconscious mind is our immune system. That also helps to keep us safe. It controls, the T cells and the white blood cells and all the functions of our immune system that fight off those pathogens that would otherwise make us sick. Now, the next component
that's the unconscious mind.
Yeah, that's the unconscious mind.
I'm glad you made that distinction, because I generally don't even talk about the unconscious mind, but that's great.
Well, and like I said, David, in a lot of contexts, it's really not that important a lot of times to distinguish between the unconscious and the subconscious. But in this context, I wanted to go ahead and do that. Now, the distinction between the unconscious mind and the subconscious mind is the subconscious mind is who we really are. That's the database of information that starts off when we're born. Now, unlike the unconscious mind, which kind of comes pre-programmed, right? Because even a baby has instincts, and even the simplest animals have instincts. A baby will seek out the nipple and will automatically know how to feed itself with that nipple as soon as it's born. It knows to cry, right? Those are all functions of the unconscious mind. Well, the subconscious mind is different because it starts off as a blank slate, totally empty. And it's basically the repository or the storehouse or the database, however you want to think of it, of all the experiences that we have throughout our life. It encodes and stores everything we've ever seen, heard, felt, all of our perceptions, And as that database of information builds up over time, there comes a point where there's enough information in there to start to consolidate that information. And we start to form specific beliefs and attitudes and our personality forms. Okay, and there's some debate about this, but most researchers agree that that's probably around the age of 7 or 8. Okay.
All right. Good.
And that's really what we're when we're working with hypnosis, we're working with the subconscious part of the mind, and we can even influence the unconscious part of the mind. But that's where all those habitual behaviors in the subconscious mind, that's where those things reside.
Right.
And that's where we're working primarily when we're using hypnosis. Now, the next component of the mind is called the critical factor. Now, the critical factor can be thought of as a comparing mechanism, or maybe if you want to think of it in a little different terms, it's the big burly bouncer at the door when you're trying to get into the dance club, right? That's that guy. Okay, he's the bouncer. So, right, he's the and basically his job is important. But when you're trying to get in there and make changes that are really important, he can really get in the way. So basically, his job as a comparing mechanism is when new information shows up at the door, right, the people that want to get in, he checks to make sure that those people are similar enough to the kinds of people that are already in there. Or in terms of our mind, the critical factor's job as a comparing mechanism is to check and make sure that the new information that wants to get in is like the information that's already in there, right?
Yeah, it's a good explanation. I like that. That's really sharp.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I like to tell people that. You're going to tell go ahead about the conscious mind. I'll let people know. I'll tell people what I say about that. Yeah.
Sure. Now, last but not least is the conscious mind, and that's. Most people are familiar with what you're talking about when you say the conscious mind, but there's more to it. It's actually when you're a hypnotherapist, the idea of the conscious mind can really be explained pretty simply, and that is where your attention is, okay, your point of focus. So basically, another metaphor that I like to use that's really illustrative of this is how the conscious mind relates to the subconscious mind. Specifically, is the subconscious mind can be thought of as a really vast, almost infinite in size warehouse. And the warehouse, like I mentioned before, is a storage space for everything that we've ever experienced. All of our perceptions, our memories, our beliefs, our habits, all of that is in that big dark warehouse. Well, the conscious mind can be thought of one of those mining hats, with the lamp on the front. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a narrow beam, and wherever you look, the light will illuminate what you're looking at. But it's very limited. You can only see a very limited amount. Everything else is dark. And the example that I like to give clients when I'm discussing this is, as you're sitting there listening to me, you're understanding the words that I'm saying. And maybe you're looking at my face and noticing my facial expressions and stuff like that to help you understand my words. But what you're not thinking about is the way that your right foot feels right now in your shoe, and the temperature of the air, most likely, and a million other things. Now, as soon as I say that, what happens? Their attention shifts, and now they are acutely aware of how their right foot feels in their shoe, right? And they immediately notice the temperature of the air. Well, that's that shifting, moving conscious mind, moving to whatever it is that we want to pay attention to. And again, it's very limited. Lots of research out there shows that it can only focus on 7 plus or minus 2 things at a time before it gets lost, right?
I personally think that's being very generous, specifically with
yes,
me.
Yes, I do too. Well, yeah. I agree with you 100%. I think most people are kind of in the 5 range, if not lower than that.
I'm more like in the 3
times.
range. On the high end, I'm at a 3 probably.
Yeah. We're going to be generous, and we're going to say,
right.
Up to 9.
Yeah. What I like to sort of illuminate that with.
Sure.
The subconscious mind, as you said, it lets a lot of similar information in. And say, for example, someone who grew up and taught themselves how to smoke, overcame the hacking and the vomiting in order to learn to inhale burning weeds. And it became a habit. And now their conscious mind, that little beam of light, is saying, I want to stop this. And so it's shining the light on quitting, but they've built up all this massive infrastructure in the subconscious mind that they don't have access to. And so it's really a challenge. So I often tell people that the conscious mind, first of all, is the part of you that wants to change. The subconscious mind is the part that's doing something entirely different. You want to lose weight, but this other part of you wants to have ice cream at 9 o'clock at night. You want to be a non-smoker, but this part wants a cigarette now. And there's always this conflict between the two. And my job, and again, I tell people, the subconscious mind isn't broken. It's doing its job. It's got a lot of information in there. Some of it is conflicting, but
right.
It's doing its job. So it is not broken. You're simply running on a set of information or some programming that is totally outdated for what you want. And then hypnosis is just the process of updating that information. So that's my most simple explanation of the mind when I talk with people.
Right.
Oh, and another thing, I want to give you some compliments about the book. So,
go ahead, feel free.
The thing that I like about the book that I think benefits most people is it is referenced. You have references to studies that support what you've said, scientific studies, not someone who gazed into a crystal or got onto a Ouija board or anything like that, but actual scientists who used hypnosis and demonstrated the results through the scientific method. So these are things that are documented.
Yeah, that's one of my personal favorites parts of the book is the appendix in the back. There are 2 appendices. The first appendix is dedicated to recent scientific studies that have been done that demonstrate the efficacy of hypnosis for a fairly wide variety of the most common things that hypnosis is used for. And there's not just 1 or 2 studies in there. There's study after study after study after study, and you don't have to take my word for it. Those are referenced. You can go to the original study. You can look it up. You can read it yourself if you want to. There's a lot of people out there that are analytical, like myself, and they want proof. Well, here's the proof. There's a big section in this book that talks all about that. Thank you, David. I appreciate that.
Yeah. My favorite study it's rather ancient, but it goes back to who was the hypnotist? He was a mesmerist who traveled to India and developed a mesmeric clinic. Begins with a B, I think his name was.
Well, there is a section in my book on the history of hypnosis too. The particular person that you're talking about, there was Braid.
Braid, that's the one, and he documented. I mean, he didn't give the results of the surgeries, but he did talk about the surgeries where he would remove giant tumors using just hypnosis. Granted, antiseptic treatments were not, modern hygiene was not implemented there, so you can only speculate on the consequences. But he was able to remove tumors surgically in long procedures using just hypnosis. And that's the earliest documented, scientifically documented cases. But of course, more recently, I've talked to a couple of hypnotists who, and again, I did not look into it, but they did entire heart surgeries largely with hypnosis because the person could not use anesthetic. And granted, the situation was unique. This person was highly motivated. It took a great deal of hypnotic training to make sure it would happen. So, and of course, the surgical staff was briefed on how to proceed this way, but that made a huge difference. And again, very minimal anesthetic for an open heart surgery.
Yeah, and my book talks about Braid, which was all the way back in. Braid was born in 1795, the late 1700s, and from that point, there were additional doctors who routinely used hypnosis as the only source of anesthetic to perform major surgeries. And the interesting thing is, and you can read that section too of the book, but very frequently their results were way better than their contemporaries at the time. Their mortality rate was far lower, their success rate was far higher, but they were ostracized and kind of villainized by their colleagues because they were doing something different. That's human nature.
Yeah.
And there's a section, and I try to keep the history portion to be not too boring, but again geared toward the layperson that doesn't necessarily know much about hypnosis, but can kind of see the evolution. It's not a really big section, but they can kind of see how hypnosis evolved from way, way back. Most people don't realize that the ancient Egyptians, 3,000 years ago, David, used hypnosis for surgeries and for other types of healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you think is, within your book, the most helpful parts for the general reader?
Well, that's a really good question. It's impossible for me to know that, but that's what the second part of the book is all about. The second part of the book is all about taking those specific issues, for example, weight loss. And there's an entire section on weight loss that talks all about how hypnotherapy specifically can help with weight loss, not just to lose weight, but the biggest problem that people struggle with weight have, anybody that's struggled with weight will tell you the biggest challenge isn't even necessarily keeping it off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hypnosis is far and away the single most effective method for weight and, more importantly, keeping it off. It's 30 to the studies that are also referenced in the book, of course, 30 times more effective than just trying to do it through willpower alone.
Right. Yeah. The thing about willpower, and this is something I tell people, willpower is awesome, but it requires conscious effort. And anytime you relax, something's going to come back up. So it takes and willpower also gets exhausted after a while. We have this little storage bank of it, and we sort of squeeze out as much as we can, and then we get exhausted, and we go back to other behaviors. So it takes a certain strength of character to use willpower alone to overcome really entrenched habits and patterns. It's very difficult, and whatever the specific issue is for that person, that obviously is the thing that's the most important for that person. So there's that specific section in the book where they can skip right to that particular issue that they're struggling with, or that they would like improvement in their life, whether that's weight loss or smoking cessation or learning to be a better golfer, or
learning to spice up your sex life. There's a section on that in the book too, and many, many other things. So what part is the most important? Well, whatever's most important for them, and they can go right to the section and learn everything they wanted to know about how hypnosis relates to that particular issue.
Yeah, the whole amazing thing to me, you talk about golf. For those people who have used hypnosis for, well, sports performance, first of all, they're highly motivated, and they pretty consistently get a very positive result, which is really amazing. And I'm totally surprised that, well, there are people who only do golf hypnosis, which is really interesting, or stuff like that. But I'm all the athletes that are really good will say something about how it's really a mental game. And
Absolutely.
most of them have trained in some sort of way, maybe hypnosis, or maybe it's something they simply have learned to do on their own, mental rehearsal. I remember when I was learning certain skills that were really challenging, I would literally stand in front of a mirror and rehearse it and imagine every obstacle coming my way and finding a way to overcome it. And that's what those people who do performance skills like sports or acting or something like that, that's what they naturally sort of find works really well when they get really good at it. Otherwise, you need to find a hypnotist or a trainer to sort of help you mentally do that.
Right.
What are
there's
some
a million different. I was just
ahead.
going to say there's a million different names for that: guided visualization, mental rehearsal. But at the end of the day, all of those things are essentially hypnosis.
Yeah.
And someone who reads this book is going to understand that.
Right. What are some things in the book that are new to the field of hypnosis?
Oh, good question. I'm glad that you brought that up. Actually, there's one thing in particular that I found pretty fascinating, and that I didn't really see in too many other resources, because I do read a lot myself. And one of the interesting things that is mentioned in the Ultimate Guide to Hypnosis is the idea of hypnosis tapping into the same mechanism that we use every night when we sleep. There's a very well-respected research psychologist in the UK named Joe Griffin, and he and his partner Ivan Terrell have created what's known as the human Givens approach. They're counselors and research psychologists, and they were the first, as far as I'm aware, as far as I can see, to notice this connection between the REM state that we experience when we dream and hypnosis tapping into that, what I like to call the reality generator of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody thinks back to the last time they had a really vivid dream, you'll remember that when you're actually in that moment, having that dream, it seems so real. Even if there are bizarre things happening, it feels so real that you can't tell the difference between that vivid dream and reality. Well, hypnosis taps into that same mind mechanism. That's why in hypnosis people can have hallucinations, positive and negative hallucinations, and totally change their perception.
Right.
And that's one thing that I talk about in this book that you probably won't see in a lot of other resources. That's kind of on the more cutting edge of hypnosis research.
It's interesting. You reminded me of something that I occasionally see with my hypnosis subjects, which is the REM state stands for rapid eye movement, and when you're dreaming in the REM state, your eyes just dart right back and forth, like rapid eye movement, obviously. And occasionally, it does not happen all the time, but there are occasions when I'm working with clients and I'm describing a situation, And all of a sudden, I'm just seeing their eyes, underneath their eyelids, of course, just going back and forth and back and forth. And that, to me, that says their mind is actually seeing something.
Yes.
Hopefully they're seeing what I'm describing to them, and they generally report that, they are. But it tells me that they're actually in the experience that's being described.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting sort of connection there when you notice that. And sometimes, even occasionally, I used to notice that when I would tell stories or recite very visual poetry, and you'd look at people and their eyes would just be darting back and forth as if they don't see me or what's in front of them, and their vision actually just sort of shut off, and they're creating this image in their mind, and their eyes are darting back and forth with their eyes open.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something the mind does that's pretty interesting. But again, I don't see it all the time. When it does, I know something really dramatic's taking place.
Yeah. I often see it when I'm asking them specifically to visualize something to one degree or another, and sometimes it'll be really obvious, really pronounced, and other times it'll be really subtle. But after reading that research and I started to notice it myself in dealing with my own clients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So to mostly recap, my understanding of the book is this is largely for the person who's interested in using hypnosis. It's also a great reference for hypnosis, but if someone really wants to do some hands-on but sort of fundamental research about hypnosis just to understand it in more layman's terms, that's really who you wrote it for.
Yeah, this is designed for the layperson, for a person who doesn't want to be a hypnotist. Now, a hypnotherapist, especially a newer hypnotherapist or hypnotist, is going to gain a lot of benefit from this too. But this book is primarily written for the person that wants to learn how to use hypnosis, but not necessarily be a hypnotherapist. Mm-hmm. There's a section in there on how to get from your hypnotherapy sessions. What the client can do to make sure that they're maximizing the effectiveness of their session. That's a really important thing, because people need to take responsibility for their results. The hypnotherapist is not a magician.
Yeah, it's not a salon. It's not a salon where you sit back. You have some responsibility as a hypnosis client. I like to remind people.
Right. Got to participate that. And this book hits that pretty hard. It reinforces it over and over again. So if a hypnotherapist were to give this book to their client's going to be really well prepared to get the best results. That client's going to be much easier to work with. They're going to be well educated. They're going to be well informed. When they're ready to do the hypnosis, they're going to feel safe. They're going to feel confident. They're going to feel excited and empowered. And that's exactly the kind of client that you want. And well, obviously, David, as a hypnotherapist, a lot of the reason why I wrote this book was as, and I'll be honest, as a marketing tool.
Oh, good. I was just going to ask you about that, because
absolutely.
You had a whole process in mind where you're going to sort of leverage this book to help your clients.
Right. Yeah. To help educate them, to help get them excited, and to help them make a good decision to go ahead and make that call and book some sessions.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that that's out in the open, because I really liked how you described writing it for that purpose, and for the people in the area who want to see you, you pretty much make the book easily available for them. Yeah,
I do.
Okay.
In my ads and things like that, often offer to give the book away for free.
Right. Not that anyone who calls you right now is going to get it for free, but
no, those are just under special circumstances.
Right.
For just $10 on Amazon, it's a great value. There's a lot of really, really hard-hitting, practical value for anybody that wants to learn about hypnosis in this book, if I do say so myself.
Well, I totally agree with you on that. I think it's valuable for anyone who wants to learn about it. And last words, anything else you want to say about this? Obviously, give it a plug. How are they going to get it? And tell us about yourself.
Well, people can order it from Amazon.com. Just go to Amazon.com, do a search for The Ultimate Guide to Hypnosis by John Wylie, and you can purchase it there in paperback form. There are also, if you want to use this book, if you're a professional and you want to use this book to give out to your clients as an educational piece, just contact me, and there are ways to get access to that book essentially at wholesale, and I'd be happy to discuss any arrangements like that.
Awesome. That's perfect. Absolutely. Well, John, I've really been eager to hear about this, and I've seen and read the book. It's certainly of value to those people who are looking into hypnosis. So thank you for writing it.
Thanks, David.
And that pretty much is going to wrap it up here. As I mentioned before, the Hypnotorious Podcast, we put something out every week. We want as broad a interested audience in hypnosis as possible. And if anyone who's listening here has questions or topics to discuss, I would love to delve into it. And wherever you find the link to this broadcast, please send one of us a message, and we'll be happy to make that happen.
Yeah, we love to talk about anything hypnosis related.
Yeah, even the freaky stuff, which you can hear about in some of the earlier podcasts, by the way.
Some of the future ones too, I'm sure.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Well, this has been the Hypnotorious Podcast. I am David Barron, a hypnotist. We've been doing hypnosis for 20 years. John?
I'm John Wylie. I own Boise Hypnosis in beautiful Boise, Idaho. I've been doing hypnosis for over 10 years and love it more and more all the time.
Awfully fun. Getting those smiles on the faces is what really makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, thank you so much. We will be back with another podcast next week. Thank you very much. This has been the Hypnotorious Podcast. I'm David Barron.
Bye for now.
Bye.